Welcome to Stageworthy. I'm Phil Rickaby, the host and producer of this podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you like this episode, hit the subscribe button, and click that bell icon so that every time I release an episode, you'll get notified. And if you're listening to the audio-only version, make sure you're subscribed. Just open your favorite podcast app, search for Stageworthy, and hit the follow or subscribe button. That way, whenever I drop an episode, it will get downloaded directly to your device. You won't have to do anything. Stay tuned to the end of this episode for a little preview of who my guest is next week. But this week, my guest is Michael Kras. Michael is a playwright and director and also one of Canada's busiest magic designers. He's designed magic and illusions for stage productions of all sizes. And in addition to his work in theaters across Canada, he's also the magic and illusions lead for the national tour of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the national tour. I had a great conversation with Michael. We talk about magic. We'll talk about playwriting. We'll talk about what it's like to design magic. We'll even talk about the magic book that Michael designed. Now, here's my conversation with Michael Kras. Michael Kras, thank you so much for joining me. Just to jump in, I think you just were able to announce that you were chosen for Tarragon Theater's Greenhouse residency. Tell me about that. Are you working on something specific, and tell me about that program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am working on a brand new play called Love Me Back. And Love Me Back is a play with sleight-of-hand magic, and it's a solo piece, and it's something that I'll be performing myself as a magician, as a storyteller, actor, and also the writer of the piece and the designer of the magic in the piece. This is a play I've been commissioned by Greenlight Arts in Kitchener to work on, and then the residency with the Tarragon is a way to explore some of the initial ideas around it and do some proof of concept audience and performer relationship stuff. So we'll present an excerpt of the piece in January at the Greenhouse Festival at the Tarragon, and then after that, we will develop the full show to present with Greenlight Arts in a future season.
Now, you've been a playwright. You've been a magician, doing mostly sleight of hand. Is this the first time that you've put these two things together?
In this way, yeah. I've only recently begun doing magic direction and design for theater in the past couple of years. And this is the first time that I'm writing a piece that directly integrates magic, and especially one that I'll be performing myself. So it's really kind of uncharted territory for me artistically. And it's the scariest prospect of writing a play that I've ever had by a long shot, largely because it centers me, but also because it centers magic, which is something that I have separated from my theater work for so long. And now I'm finally merging those things in a really meaningful way. So there's lots I don't know yet that I'll be finding out when I start this residency, when I'm working with Greenlight on the full play, and we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Can we delve for a second? I would really love to talk about if there's a reason why you kept these things so separate, the writing and the magic.
Interesting. Well, I think I've been a magician for much longer than I've been in theater. It's been even like a childhood obsession of mine. And when I got more into theater as a young adult and went to college, I went to Humber College and studied acting in their physical theater program. And magic was still part of my life, but it largely took a back seat because I, at the time, saw magic as sort of this dishonest barrier between me and my audience, where there was this sort of built-in idea of, I'm going to do something that I know how to do. You don't know how to do it. I'm going to deceive you. And therefore, it felt like a roadblock to the honesty that I really wanted to integrate into my theater work as an actor, as a writer. And so the way that people approached me and the way that people treated me when I did magic for them was something I kind of wanted to put aside and really focus on becoming a well-rounded actor and theater maker. And then I only decided to merge those things again when I started doing magic design and magic direction. And that started when Harry Potter and the Cursed Child opened in Toronto, and I got hired on to be their resident magic director. And I got to see firsthand that magic can actually be quite an interesting and honest and impactful tool for storytelling in a piece of theater and not just an imposition on it. It doesn't create a wall for its audience. It helps to support a story. And so that's why I'm all of a sudden I went, oh, I can actually do these things in tandem in a really exciting and novel way.
Yeah. There's two thoughts that occur to me because Penn Jillette has often complained about the dishonesty of magic. And it's the thing that the Penn and Teller team have often been like, this is illusion. Nobody's going to pretend that this is like magic. This is illusion. And sometimes they even like do their stuff showing how it's done and things like that. But also there is, I mean, I think it was the Magic Show with Doug Henning. I don't think anybody's ever remounted it, but it was like Stephen Schwartz created a musical featuring Canadian magician Doug Henning way back in the 70s. And so it's something that has been done, like the marrying of magic and theater. But it was the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child that sort of like opened your eyes to the possibility.
Definitely. And the Magic Show, I grew up on the Magic Show. There's like a recorded version of it that was shot at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre in Toronto with a lot of the original cast, including Doug Henning, many, many years ago. And you're right, it's never been remounted because it was kind of meant to be a star vehicle for Doug Henning. And it was also, when I watch back that show, I look at the magic and I think, oh, wow, this is kind of like when you see, and it's not a bad musical, but it makes me think of bad musicals where the songs are like, we're going to stop the show, here's a song, and everything kind of like gets like driven, like just stops in its tracks. And the Magic Show for me is kind of like that, where all of the magic in the show feels like this weird sort of like hokey, cheesy imposition on the story, or it feels shoehorned in there. And then Harry Potter, the magic in that show is like bespoke for the show, and it's stuff that was built to support the story in a magical realm, which the play and that world exists in. And so all the magic, everything in that show is built to further the plot and the story, and it feels of a piece with what's going on. And so that to me was the big difference, and that made me go, oh, this is what magic can do in a play.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely see, because, first off, Doug Henning, not known for his singing ability. And also, here's Stephen Schwartz creating a musical as a vehicle for Doug Henning. But also, I definitely see it as something like, we do the thing, there's a plot, and then Doug does something. And then it's like, I could definitely see that as a possibility. Now, the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. How did you find yourself as the magic consultant for that show?
So that was from a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. It was that sort of thing where I had received a direct message on Instagram from someone that I went to theater school with, who wasn't in my year, but we knew each other. And she knew that I was a magician and also a theater person. And she reached out to me saying, hey, I know someone who knows someone who knows someone who's looking for someone, has a background in magic and also in like theater and directing. I mentioned you. I hope that's okay. And I said, oh, sure. Don't know what it's for, but great. And then I found out later that it was for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. And I went, oh, interesting. I don't know what they could possibly want me for, but great. Yeah, it was cool. And no one reached out to me for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I saw Mervish posted like the first day of rehearsal videos and stuff. And I thought, okay, whatever that was, the ship has sailed. But then 2 weeks after that, I got an email through my website from the Broadway Magic Associate, my friend Skylar Fox. And he reached out to schedule a phone call with me. We chatted for a long time on the phone. We talked about philosophies in magic, philosophies in theater directing and leading a room, all of those things in tandem. And he just sort of vetted me and make sure that I was like a normal magician and not a weird magician, important distinction, and that I also knew how to lead a theatrical process. All those things were important. And so after we talked for a while, I was asked to assemble a resume of just my theater and my magic experience. So I did that, sent it off. And then a few days later, I had a Zoom call with all the original creatives on the Illusions team for Harry Potter. And then a few minutes after I finished that call, I got a call saying that they wanted to hire me for the job. And I was joining the rehearsal process 4 days later in Toronto, took a train in. And I just sort of had to learn on the fly. And it was all about inheriting all the magic for the show, because the role is sort of like the dance captain in a musical, where there's like 100+ magic effects, big and small things, sleight-of-hand tricks, big, large-scale illusions in Harry Potter. And they needed someone to help direct those sequences and also teach understudies and swings and covers, and then look after the show long-term. So I'm always taking notes. I'm always watching the show, making sure actors are supported in what they're doing and that the magic continues to look amazing. So it's sort of, it becomes like a dance captain, resident director kind of role. And there's been a big push. I mean, before Harry Potter, you would have called this kind of role a magic consultant. But I think now it's a more integrated job where a lot of magic designers around the world, like the magic in Harry Potter was designed by Jamie Harrison, who's one of the big magic designers in theater around the world. He's done a bunch of shows. If you see magic in a play, there is a good chance Jamie or someone that works with Jamie did the magic for that show. And there's a big push to no longer call it a consultant and to call it more of a magic designer or magic director, just like you would call a lighting designer a lighting designer and those sorts of things, where it's you become integrated into the process, and it's not as simple as I'm going to come in for a day, teach a trick, and then leave. It's like, no, you're part of the entire creative process in a very holistic and integrated way. And so that's what Harry Potter kind of set the standard for, and that's what's popping up more and more in theater around the world, and it's starting to come into Canada more too.
Now, you alluded to this role being more like a dance captain than sort of a consultant. Yeah. Does that mean that you're like, are you there watching the magic every day like a dance captain is? Because I worked as an usher for a bunch of shows at Mervis theaters and would watch the dance captain come out from the back to watch in the balcony for like the big dance numbers and things, take notes and give people things like that. Are you doing that kind of thing, or are you coming in occasionally?
I'm doing that exact work, but on a more occasional basis. So right now, I mean, when I did the Canadian production of the show, I watched the show twice a week. Now I watch it about once a month or more if I'm going down to, I look after the North American tour of the show now. So I'm going to the United States a lot. And so I'll go into the States and watch the show like that. And I'll sit in the audience. I will take notes. I'll support the cast. I'll send them notes. I'll talk to them in their dressing rooms and make sure that all of the magic continues to look just as sharp and amazing and specific. Because it is so, I mean, I quite literally feel like a dance captain sometimes, because some of the magic in that show, to make it as clear and exciting as possible, is tied to choreographic beats and to music. So when I'm rehearsing with actors, I'm counting like a choreographer would and really making sure that all of the beats are super clear, because when you're doing magic on stage in a play, sometimes the difference between a trick really landing and not landing at all is the rhythm of it. So making sure that all of those beats are super clear all the way through and that every moment of magic is landing very specifically for the audience is a huge part of the job in a way I didn't expect.
Is it similar to the way that, like, you know, there's sport fencing, which is closer to actual like sword fighting, and then there's stage combat sword fighting, which is really about being flashy and making sure that everybody, that it lands, that everybody can sort of see the thing happen, right? Is it closer to that? Yeah.
It's very much like that. And it's funny because it's often walking that fine line between the magic looking really contrived and looking like it's part of the world of the show, because it's not even just the magic moment itself that I'm looking after. I'm also looking after all the periphery, because sometimes before a trick is done or after a trick is done, there's something sneaky happening on stage in one way or another. And I have to make sure that that sneaky thing looks completely natural and unsuspicious before and after the trick happens.
Right. Of course.
Yeah, exactly. So oftentimes when I'm doing the trick with someone, with an actor, I'm making sure they're doing something in a way that to them probably feels really forced and contrived. But I tell them it lands very clearly for the audience and it doesn't feel contrived to us. It feels contrived to you because that's not the way you move as a human being. But for the story to land super clearly, you really need to make sure that when this object appears in your hand, you hold it in the same point in space for a couple of beats so everyone sees it. Like, it's stuff like that. So yeah, but it's so detailed and specific. It's almost you want to tear your hair out over it sometimes, but it has to be that way because magic, it's not like choreography in a show where if someone misses a step or two, no one really notices or cares. If a magic trick doesn't work, it's not magic. It's either magic or it isn't. So you really need to make sure that all those things land super clearly. Otherwise, there's no moment of magic.
That sounds very difficult.
It sure is.
I actually want to ask, because your history with magic, your magic background is primarily sleight of hand, but this is like big illusions.
Mm-hmm.
What's the learning curve for you like coming into like a role like this when you're usually doing something that's more like a close-up magic thing and this is a bigger illusion trick? Or is it just principles are the same, or what's that learning curve like?
In some ways, it felt completely foreign to me. In other ways, it's like, oh, this is the same thing on a different scale in a different context. And I actually think about it in terms of whenever I do rehearsals with brand new actors coming into the world of Harry Potter, if we have a new cast joining, I do Intro to Magic, which all of the magic directors for this show around the world do, where we teach a very basic sleight of hand trick to get the process started and to introduce the company to all of the principles of magic, of sleight of hand, of misdirection, of illusion. And we do this tiny sleight of hand trick, but then we also emphasize that everything in the show is basically just this trick on a larger scale. So the principles inherent in this trick translate perfectly to everything else in the show, even if the thing we're doing in the show is 200 times bigger than this little sleight of hand trick. So on those terms, I came in with a lot of internal knowledge. Even though I hadn't done big illusions myself as a performer, I knew all of the things that went into creating that illusion. And so I was able to support that magic pretty much right away. But in terms of really, really working on it and refining it, it was a very different language for me on those terms. And so it was kind of the best of both worlds of being really challenging and really new and exciting. But also I had enough internal basis in my own kind of magic brain to be able to support that work right away and help it look amazing.
Yeah. Now, one thing that just occurred to me is the fact that you're working on this on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which is, I mean, it sort of, I don't even know, like the breadth of people who are familiar with that story sort of like is not theater for young audiences anymore. But your playwriting has largely been about theater for young audiences. And so this is sort of an extension of that kind of thing. Your playwriting and your magic sort of coming together into one thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, as far as like the playwriting and writing for young audiences, was there what has made you want to primarily write for young audiences?
I think what excites me about plays for young people is that the inner worlds of young people are so expansive and so big and deeply felt that I just love living in those stories, because I feel like young people are in a constant state of self-discovery, even if they're not always aware of it. A lot of young people think they have it all figured out, but they still are learning every single day about themselves, about the world around them. But also, I don't think we ever stop growing up. I don't think we ever stop the process of coming of age. I think we're still learning about ourselves until the day we die. And so I think there is a universality to theater for young audiences that extends well beyond the worlds of young people. But I think that TYA is a great way of introducing really, really big ideas about the world in a really palatable and accessible and approachable way. Because everything I've written for young audiences deals with very heavy topics like toxic masculinity and sexual assault and bullying and internalized misogyny, all of those things. And yet they exist in these realms where they're given that weight, they're given the weight they deserve, but they're told in a story that feels like it's easier to buy into than maybe something that just like hits you with a big adult punch right away. So I love that, because also I think that young people wear their hearts on their sleeve, and I love the way that they communicate with each other. And I love how it is both extremely flawed and fractured, but also really, really open-hearted and really, really vulnerable and honest. And I just find that so exciting as a writer, because I love capturing people who are trying their best to find the correct way of expressing something and not quite being able to do it. It's my favorite thing about writing plays. I think there's so much dramatic tension in that kind of writing, and so I love to capture that.
Yeah. One thing that you said that I really loved was that we never really grow up. We continue to find ourselves every day. But I think that there's sort of like it's, I don't know, toxic ageishness where somebody sort of calcifies and believes that now I am finished. Now I know everything I need to know, and they stop growing. They stop trying to grow. They stop trying to find themselves, which is, I think, something that the world outside of, say, theater, where we play every day and we're discovering things all the time, can sometimes find people and get them stuck and stultified. And it's kind of good whenever you can bring people into and disarm them with magic, and both through playwriting and bringing them the magic of theater, but also like illusions, because you sometimes do illusions on like Instagram, on Reels and stuff.
I do.
Do people react in sort of a childish way when you can you watch the child in them when you're doing magic?
Yeah. In a big way, I think it is a kind of the ultimate way of unlocking that side of someone. When a magic trick is really amazing, it upends for even a brief moment your understanding of the way the world works. And it takes you back to a time where you were still really, really learning how the world works. And so I find that when a trick really lands for someone, they go back decades in their life and they become a young person or they become a child just for a moment. And I mean, I've been working with the director and my dramaturg on Love Me Back, which is my magic solo play, is Matt White, who's the AD of Greenlight Arts. And I've been pulling out magic for him while we've been working and trying to see what's landing for him and what isn't. And there are moments where like we'll be sitting with each other, I'll do a trick for him and he'll stand up and walk across the room and just like vocalize in these ways that are totally uninhibited. And it's such an exciting contrast from like the very kind of straightforward adult playwriting work we're doing together. All of a sudden, the person I'm working with in the room becomes a kid just for a moment. And I find that really exciting because there aren't a lot of art forms that do that to somebody in a really, really profound way. And I think magic has the power to do it if you do the magic well.
I fully agree. I love watching magic. I love it. And I always have, because I grew up watching, I'm old enough to have watched like Doug Henning's specials on TV where he'd laugh like big, like everything else stops, Doug Henning's on, that sort of thing. And so I definitely could see how it affects that way. But I want to go back a second. I really want to talk more about you and theater and playwriting. And I want to ask you about how that started. How did you discover theater? How did you get involved in theater? How did you start writing?
Ooh, I discovered theater young enough that I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I do know that whenever it took me, the hooks were deep. I saw my uncle in community theater productions of musicals like Jekyll and Hyde the musical and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat when I was a kid, and it unlocked something in me. And I remember going to the library and pulling out Broadway cast recordings of shows that sounded interesting to me and discovering theatrical storytelling through music and through musical theater. And then that turned into me putting on productions in my basement with my sister using found objects, which is very much in the spirit of devised theater. Just didn't know it yet. And then that just turned into a lifelong obsession with storytelling and with performing and with just communicating with people in an artistic way that involves two bodies in a space sharing a story together. And so from there, I did theater in high school. I was an actor. That's where I got my first taste of playwriting, was doing the Sears Drama Festival when it was still called that. Now it's the NTS Drama Festival. But those were my earliest exposures to it. Studied acting at Humber College, did physical theater there. Left that school thinking, I think I'm more of a playwright and director than an actor. So that's been my focus largely ever since. And ever since then, it has been the same thing of I want to tell stories that illuminate my own perspective on the world and also the things that I wish I knew more about and want to understand better and want to have more dialogue with other people about. And that's why I write plays, is I want to put stories into the world that are entertaining and that make people really, really feel something, but that also make them engage with ideas about the world around them in a challenging way or a different way.
Do you remember when you discovered or learned, or when was the moment that you figured out that like theater was a thing that you could do? Not just a fun thing that you sort of did in your basement, but a thing that you could do.
I think it was probably through the Sears Drama Festival, where all of a sudden we had resources to create a thing on some form of a scale, but then also, I mean, it's weird to think of theater in like a meritocracy sense and giving awards to plays to young teenagers who are still discovering themselves. You know, I think that in some ways is an inherently flawed idea, but it was also, as someone who won a couple of Sears Awards, it was very encouraging. And I remember, I think what maybe pushed me into continuing to write plays after high school was that I wrote a play in my final year of high school for the Sears Festival. I had never moved past the initial like district qualifying round in Sears. And that was the year that I really, really tried all my best to do that. Didn't make it for my final year, was kind of bummed out about that. But then my play, the script was one of the 4 finalists for the new play award at the provincial level. And I got an envelope mailed to my high school that said that. And that was a huge encouragement, because all of a sudden I had these score sheets from people in the theater industry who were telling me really, really encouraging things about the way I was writing and encouraging me to keep going. And I'm like, oh, these are people who work in Canadian theater, and they're telling me that they think that there's something to the work I'm doing. And some of those people I've worked with to this day. Andrew Lamb, who is the AD of Rosny Theater, he was one of the people that scored one of my high school plays. And Rosny has produced my work since then. I've written a play for them in residence, and it has toured with them in the past, in past seasons twice. And I met him and became aware of him when I was not even 18 years old yet. So I think that was one of the key moments where I went, oh, maybe there is something that I can do with this in my life in an actual legitimate way that is a part of my existence on this planet in a professional way, but also in a personally fulfilling way.
There is something about, I mean, the sort of, you alluded to how weird it is to like give awards for theater. And I mean, everybody says that until they're nominated for a Dora Award or whatever. But it's like, rewards are dumb. Oh, an award? Okay, yes, please. But also, for a high school student, it's literally rewarding. It's literally like something that says, yes, you're on the right track. Yes, keep going with this. Yes, this is worth it. In a way that outside of, say, something like the NTS Drama Festival or the Sears Drama Festival doesn't really happen. People don't tend to get awards in high school or anything for acting. People get medals for like sports stuff all the time, but not so much for the arts.
Yeah.
The work you've done in Hamilton is quite significant. You've been working with, you were part of the Theatre Aquarius playwrights unit. You've been doing stuff all over Hamilton. I think, am I wrong that you've done stuff at the Hamilton Fringe as well?
A few times, yes.
One of the things that I'm trying to sort of discover as I'm doing this show and trying to be a little less Toronto centric is the theater scenes outside of Toronto, which as somebody from here, I don't get to experience as much. What can you tell me about theater in Hamilton?
Theater in Hamilton is a very unique beast. And in some ways, I just love it with everything I have. In other ways, it breaks my heart constantly, to be very frank. I think we have a beautiful regional theater in Theatre Aquarius. And right now, under the leadership of Mary Frances Moore, it's doing incredible things. And it's really putting the spotlight on the city in an exciting way. There are also lots of really exciting professional artists who live in Hamilton now who are trying to make work here. But at the same time, there is a gigantic gap between our one big A-size regional house and all of the community and independent theaters in this city who are making work on a more sporadic basis or in a non-professional context. We don't have a mid-size theater culture the way that Toronto does. We don't have a Tarragon. We don't have a Factory or a Passe-Muraille. And I wish we did, because there are so many incredible storytellers in this city from many, many backgrounds who have really exciting and novel stories to tell. And there aren't many platforms for them to tell it. I mean, the Fringe is a huge one, but again, that's a lottery system. Just because you're in Hamilton doesn't guarantee you a slot in the Hamilton Fringe. It once did, way, way back, but not anymore. And so I think I would love to see more infrastructure for professional artists. And that's something that I've tried to make with my work. And I'm only one person. I'm only one artist. I've done some producing through the Fringe, through other things, but I'm not a producer. I am someone who's really good at getting a grant and paying the people I'm working with to do things and saying, hey, you're in Hamilton. Let's do a play reading in Hamilton and I'll pay you equity rates for it. And you get to make a professional wage in your hometown. I think that's so important, but there is a very limited, at the least, there is a very limited sustainable way of making your living as a professional artist in Hamilton while just working in Hamilton. You have to go somewhere else. So even though Hamilton has a beautiful theater scene, the people who work in this industry in a very, very serious, ongoing way have to go elsewhere to do a lot of that work. And so I don't know what the answer is, because frankly, these discussions have been had in my city for decades of like, we need to do something. We need to build another small space. We need to build a mid-sized theater company. And none of it has happened yet. Oh, I don't know if and when that will happen. I know there are lots of people in this city that are hungry for it. I think that Hamilton has a bit of an identity, I wouldn't say crisis, but still figuring itself out as far as like what its artistic identity is in the grand scheme of things. And I think while it's figuring that out, we are also trying to figure out, what does theater mean to this city, and how do we make stories in a sustainable way that gets artists paid in a sustainable way and brings new work to the city that actually matters a lot to Hamiltonians.
Yeah. I definitely see that as an issue, because, to be able to start something like a mid-sized theater requires not just will, but money.
Oh yeah.
It needs a whole lot of things. It needs city cooperation. It needs a big infusion of money, and it needs people who have the will to do it. And cities are often not at that point. Like they're not ready to commit funds, things like that. The time that birthed Passmarais Factory, Tarragon in Toronto, is long past. That was like at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, a huge infusion of government money to help build these things. And that is not something we may ever see again, which is tragic, because I know how hungry Hamilton can be for theater. You could see it during Fringe, how people just are hungry to see something new and exciting. And it is a city that deserves it. And it's really too bad that it hasn't been able to happen yet.
Yeah, I think there are lots of artists here who are trying to make work like that, but it's hard to do it in a consistent, sustainable way without that funding. And as we know, across the country, arts funding is at a crisis point in a lot of ways, and there are too many applicants for too little funding, as it always has been, but now it's like really, really, really bad. And so the idea of being able to sustainably fund something in a way that also keeps up with living wage, it feels almost impossible in so many ways. And so there is no institution in Hamilton besides Aquarius that has its feet on the ground and can pay artists in a sustainable way. And I mean, it would be great to see some kind of like repertory company here, or a company where there are a ton of resident artists a la Soulpepper or Shaw or Stratford, and where it's like the same company of artists making work on a regular basis and being able to support themselves doing it. Because otherwise, what do we really have? If we don't have a culture that can support artists making that work, those artists are going to either go elsewhere or go into careers where they won't be able to give enough of their time and energy to making theater work in a sustainable way. And that's a problem everywhere, but it's a problem in a place like Hamilton where there's so little infrastructure for theater artists so far.
Yeah. I mean, even during Fringe, there's a bunch of theater venues. They're not really theater venues. They're like, there are bars. There's a couple that are like some of the, I think some of the community theaters, some of those spaces are used, but there's not a lot in terms of theater space outside of Theater Aquarius.
Yeah, there isn't. There used to be a few venues. The Pearl Company was a really beautiful one, some nice black box spaces that no longer exist. And a lot of the venues that are used in Fringe are music venues. Like you said, there's bars that are used. Some of our indie cinemas are used and turned into theaters, even though they're not built for that or aren't built for that anymore. And so having a space, an actual black box space in this city is so crucial to being able to create work on a mid-sized level. And yet there are so few spaces. I mean, this has been a crisis point in Hamilton for a long time, the access to space and to affordable space. The Staircase, which is such a beautiful little black box theater, is under different ownership with different intentions now. It's still a performance space, but not in the same way it once was. And that used to be a place that I could go to when it was run by the wonderful Colette Kendall. And I would be like, hey, I'm 16, I have $1,000, and I want to put up a play in your theater. Can we work something out? And the answer would always be yes. If you had a button and a piece of gum, Colette would find a way to make it work for you. And those kind of artist and venue relationships are a thing of the past in a lot of ways, probably everywhere, but in Hamilton especially. And without those, I wouldn't have gotten my start in writing and producing plays because I wouldn't have been able to afford to do it. And I wouldn't be where I'm sitting today talking to you. So those things are crucial.
Yeah, for sure. The Staircase was one of the first theaters that I saw when I was in Hamilton the first time. Gorgeous space with a lovely bar out front, like so much potential to be like a great hub for theater and indie theater. And the Pearl, I did a show with Keystone Theater so many years ago. And even then, when they were talking to us about a lot of the difficulty that they were having, they were getting pushback from the city about their existence. And it's like, decide, like you could have supported this. The city could have supported this theater, even just not giving them a hard time about being a theater. But they eventually closed because I don't think they had the support they needed.
Yeah. Support is huge. Audience support is huge. City support is huge. I don't know what the answers are. The answers are that it's a structural, systemic issue, as it is in a lot of art centers, but especially one that is less developed, like it is in Hamilton. And all I can hope is that there is enough tenacity in the artists that live here to make something of what's going on in the city. And that won't happen unless we have enough infrastructure already that artists who have trained in their theater schools in Toronto actually come back to their hometown of Hamilton and make their work here. So many artists go and train somewhere else, and then they stay there because that's where the work is. So we lose great people, and without those great people, we can't build something great.
Yeah.
But we need something great to get those great people to stay here. So it's kind of a catch-22, and I don't know ultimately what the long-term solve is for it. All I know is that very little has happened in the city so far, even though there's been so much talk and passion about doing something. And I think we just need smart and driven people who know how to build infrastructure to really, really do something and to really take the lead on it. And I think a lot of artists are keen to just wait for a thing to be built, but it's like, we can't wait for a thing to be built. We have to be the ones that build it if we want to see something happen in this city. And it's a massive undertaking. I haven't started doing it. I've talked about it for years and years. I've had conversations with other people like, hey, what if we did this? And then somewhere along the line, it just falls apart. And it's tough to keep momentum behind those things going. And it's tougher and tougher in a culture that puts less and less value on arts and art spaces, especially on a funding level.
Yeah. I mean, it's the funding level. I mean, money is probably the thing that is lacking, because once you start to look at what do we need to get this going, it's probably money. And, you can have all the passion that you want, but money is absolutely necessary to get this stuff going. And like you mentioned, and like I've talked about, it's not coming. But again, it is so hard to keep that momentum going when it seems there's no easy answer. And that's the trick, is that it is probably going to be a long, hard road to get that going. And this is depressing. So let's move on to something else. Let's get back to your playwriting a bit, because, you mentioned the play that you wrote in high school, but do you remember after you finished theater school and you'd realized that you were more of a playwright, what was the first play that you wrote and what was the impetus for writing it?
Mm-hmm. After theater school, the first play I wrote a bunch in theater school, and they read like someone who was in theater school wrote them. The thing I wrote that was fresh out of theater school was a play called #Dirty Girl, which was a play about a mass slut shaming of a young teenage girl whose nude photo she sent to her boyfriend got leaked on, wait for it, Twitter. That's how already Twitter was on the way out. So in 2016 when I did this play, but it was kind of, I had such an interest in exploring the story that was outside my own experience. And I was really engaged in I had just read a bunch of like feminist literature, and I was like, I feel like there's a story here that I want to help give space for if I can. So I wrote this play, which was sort of a horror play. And as the play went on, Twitter became this sort of omnipotent monster, and it was this really strange high concept piece that was imperfect in so many ways, but also did some really, I think, interesting things that I still hold on to this day as being really interesting ideas. And that was a play that pushed me to tell a story that felt more innately political and more also just something that was a bit more challenging, of something outside of my own lived experience. And that let me tap into stories that were outside of my own and find an empathy for them. Because to write a play like that in a way that felt respectful and nuanced, I had to do a lot of research. I had to put my ego aside on a lot of things. I was a cis male playwright writing a story that centered two young women. And how do I do that in a way that is respectful of those experiences, that isn't overstepping or isn't male gazy, but that is something that also just goes there and is able to tell the story in a way that's really challenging. And I wouldn't write that play the same way today. It's been almost 10 years, oh God, since I wrote that play, now that I'm thinking about it. And the way I would write it today is very, very different. But it was sort of my introduction into, I'm going to tell a story that feels like it's going to get audiences talking in a way that is really complicated and really juicy and might completely backfire. So it felt like a risky piece to do on those grounds, but it's also the play that I feel is most in line. It's the place where I felt like, oh, this is the moment where I started to come into my voice as a playwright and the ways that I want to tell stories.
Was that play produced at the 2016 Hamilton Fringe?
It sure was.
I remember. That's the year that I was doing my show at the Hamilton Fringe. So I remember, I think you won a couple of, at least it was well reviewed. I know that. I remember that. Let's see. Again, it's almost 10 years ago, so it's hard to think back.
Yes. We won the Audience Choice Award.
There you go. Yeah, which is great. It's always, that's one of my favorite kinds of awards. Like the Audience Choice is always like, oh, this is one that like the people who came to see this one voted for this one. So it's always kind of special. I think it would be remiss of me not to discuss the fact that you, as just to move away from playwriting for a second and back to magic, it'd be remiss of me not to bring up the fact that you've written a magic book.
I sure have. Yeah.
You've written a book teaching magic, sleight-of-hand tricks, things like that. What was writing that book like?
It was so hard. I never want to do it again. No, I will. At some point, I'll write another book. Maybe not on this scale, but it was a hard task. Because I felt so reinvigorated by magic when I started doing Harry Potter, during that time when the Canadian Mirvish production was on, I started writing my book, which is called Synthesis and Secrets. There are 500 copies of it in the world. They are all over the world at this point. And I have behind me on my shelf right now, I have a bunch of beautiful magic books. I love collecting magic books, and I wanted to make a book that felt just as beautiful as the ones already on my shelf. So I did it. I wrote my own book. I've in my time doing sleight of hand magic, I've accumulated a repertoire of original magic, stuff that I've created myself. So the book is a capture of all of that stuff, things that I've created over the past 15, even 20 years of my life. And I'm only 32, but some stuff goes back to when I was like a preteen. And then there's also a bunch of essays on the synthesis of magic and theater and the way I see those two disciplines as being the same or supportive of one another in really interesting ways. So it's a collection of tricks and essays. And I hired one of the best magic book layout designers in the world to lay it out. I hired a local illustrator who I love very much to illustrate the book in full with hundreds of hand illustrations, teaching people how to do the tricks. It looks so gorgeous. I got it printed as a cloth-bound hardcover with a foil stamped cover. I went all out for it. I raised money through Kickstarter. I raised almost 20 grand to produce it, and it cost that much to produce it. That's how expensive the materials for this book were, but it's done, and I'm so happy it's in the world, and it's kind of a little bit of a legacy piece for my own internal contributions to magic.
Yeah. I mean, is it difficult to break down a trick into its component parts to describe it for people once you've got it into your body?
Oh yeah. It's a fun exercise to do it. Like I would sit down and write down my tricks and be like, oh, I've never described this in such detail before. And it really made me reacquaint myself with technique and also the why of certain technique. And so the more detailed and granular you get while also being really accessible and easy to follow, that's sort of the sweet spot. And so I tried to achieve that, but it is tough because you're trying to communicate really kind of complicated, minute little ideas in a way that is easy to understand. And ultimately, it taught me a lot about how to teach magic in theater as well, going back to that and to Harry Potter and stuff, because oftentimes when I'm doing magic direction for a play, I'm teaching magic tricks and sleight of hand and illusions to people who have never done them before in their lives and have to be able to do it with a certain degree of proficiency in just like a month's time on things that magicians work years and years and years to do as well as they do. So it becomes this constant dance of how do I break this down enough that all the details are there, but also make it very approachable for someone whose first language is not magic. And so I tried to apply those ideas to writing my book and making it as digestible as possible, but also honoring the specificity required to do those magic effects.
Wow. Sounds like a major undertaking. It must have taken ages to do.
It's very good. I tucked into it every day for months to write the original draft, and then it went through multiple revisions and passes and editorial passes, but I'm happy with the result of it.
Yeah. I want to talk about the fact that, as you've been working with the Harry Potter show, a lot of the work that you've been doing recently is across the border in the States. And you are somebody who has, since the pandemic, has continued to mask, which I completely respect, and I do as well. You mask in transit, you mask on airplanes, you mask in public. Now, going to the States, do you find pushback on the masking when you're going and working in those spaces?
Good question. Honestly, not so much. I think what helps is that I'm going to theater spaces where people do tend to be more politically and socially aligned with my values already. And I may not go into a lot of spaces where I see a lot of people still wearing a mask on a regular basis, but I'll go into spaces where people will put one on if they feel unwell. And that's more than a lot of people do nowadays. So that feels good to me. But I mean, I haven't felt it. The pushback feels the same in Canada as it does in the States. I've had very, very few moments of someone directly making it known that they don't like that I'm wearing a mask. I've had very few instances of that, but they've happened in kind of equal measure on both sides of the border for me. So I mean, it's no bother to me. It's a deeply held value of mine. So no one's going to stagger me or change my mind on it. And it's something that I do that is just it's one of the few things that I hold socially and politically for myself, or on a personal and community care level, that is very visibly telegraphed to the world. So that's a big difference. But I honestly, it doesn't change much of my day to day. It feels kind of integrated into what I do, and it hasn't changed any of the ways I live my life or do my work. I'm able to work to my fullest in all the spaces I do while still doing things like that. And on a larger scale, I think that the theater industry had a major opportunity to seize a different way forward for audience care, for performer care and artist care and crew care. And I think so few theaters actually kind of took charge on that and do things today. I love the theaters that still have an investment in clean indoor air, that still have an investment in public health and safety policies for their artists in rehearsal, for audiences when they come to the theater, making ticket exchanges very easy and accessible if you are feeling unwell so you don't come to the theater sick, having masked mandatory performances, which some theaters in Toronto still do, which is a really, really great gesture. But I think for the longevity of our industry and for the longevity of people in general, I think adapting to the world the way it is post 2020 is a thing that we still need to catch up on doing. I think the world is different than it was in 2019. And I think we're trying to live as if it is still 2019. And I don't think that's sustainable.
Yeah.
I don't think it's sustainable for our industry. I don't think it's sustainable for our humanity. That's a much bigger conversation. But I think if there was some investment in not just financial, but also just like in terms of internal infrastructure and policy for theater companies, for art institutions, I think we'd have a better way forward and a more sustainable and healthy and equitable way forward.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of theaters that sort of like threw off the mask as soon as they were able to. A few held on to it longer. But I do know that, especially for some of the indie theaters in Toronto, the pushback they got kind of from people who were against masking was so violent is the wrong word, but it was very adamant and unpleasant. Lots of yelling and lots of messages yelling that I think that sort of pushed them to let their guard down and let that go because they were unsupported. They were just like left to like deal with angry, inordinately angry people just yelling at them about a simple thing like a mask. And it's, wearing a mask on the subway, I haven't got sick from the subway. The only time I've gotten sick is like when I was not masking, which tells me a lot about how I got sick in the past, right?
Sure.
Like on the subway or taking transit or something like that. And it's such an easy thing to do. And too few people are doing it.
I think everyone doing it imperfectly would be so much better than just a few of us doing it way, way more.
Yeah.
It's to me, like, I think about, I've had friends, I'm not vegan, but I've had friends who are vegan or were vegan. And we used to have conversations about that. And they would say things like, if everybody just like went meat and dairyless a couple of meals a week, that would have more impact than like a select few of us completely swearing off animal products like entirely, which is such an interesting idea. And I think like if there was a cultural shift when the pandemic hit and more people adjusted to wearing a mask every time you get on a plane or when you're in the grocery store, and that's like an essential service that everybody has to access in some way or another, or a medical facility, I think we'd be so much better off.
Yeah.
And there are times where I feel hyper vigilant in what I'm doing for myself, like wearing a mask. And I would feel more comfortable doing it less if more people did it, even sometimes, So, or if there was more investment in cleaning indoor air, which I think is the future.
Yeah.
In a future where there are wildfires every summer across the country and across the border that spread to here. And when there are illnesses like COVID or like any other airborne illness that can really, really affect how things like canceled shows, audience health, artist health. I think if we had more emphasis on making sure the air indoors was clean and that people were able to enter spaces and not be at such high risk of getting sick all the time, I think we'd all be in a better place.
I fully agree. Just in closing, I want to, just as you sort of like, you're heading into the greenhouse residency, tell me about how you're feeling about Love Me Back and how you are approaching it as you head into this.
That's a great question. I feel very much like I'm floating in a vast, dark space right now with it because it is so different from the way I normally write plays. And ultimately, it's coming from me, so it's going to be in conversation with the other stuff I write, but I'm also writing for myself, as in like for me to perform. And I write differently for myself the way I would write for other people to say my words. So that alone feels different. But then also the idea of integrating magic into this in a way that feels more like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, less like the magic show with Doug Henning, where it's like, I don't want the magic to be these like impositions and interstitial interruptions for the narrative. I want them to support the storytelling. So I'm going into it trying to emphasize for myself that I'm going in on story first and text first and finding magic to support that text after the fact, and not going in with, oh, here's a bunch of tricks I love and want to do. How can I write a story around them? Because that's going to end up being contrived and forced and feel really clunky. And at the same time that I'm working on Love Me Back, I'm designing a few plays. In Toronto, I'm designing magic for Clyde's, the Lynn Nottage play at Canadian Stage, which is directed by Philip Aiken and going up in the spring. At the same time, I'm doing a new play called Verses by Adam Lazarus and Guillermo Verdecchia and Anne-Marie Kerr. And so those are two pieces that have magic as a consistent through language in the piece that is there to support the text. And it's magic that I'll be creating in response to the text. So that's going to be the same with Love Me Back, where it's like I have to write a play and then I have to create magic that supports that writing and really lifts it in the way that you would write a song for a musical to say something in a way that plain text alone can't.
Yeah, I definitely see. I like the allusion to writing for a musical.
Yeah,
but it's also interesting. The way that you described, like it's different than writing for yourself than writing for others. I was talking with the playwright Chloe Whitehorn just a couple of days ago, and we were talking about how every time we sit down to write a play, it's like we're relearning how to write this play. Like I wrote that play.
Yes.
I wrote this play. That's how I wrote this one. And this one, I will have to learn how to write this play. And every play is a new learning experience, which is always like a sort of a fascinating way to be, is to just sort of realize that you're always learning and you're always growing. And each time you sit down, what worked last time doesn't necessarily work.
It's so true. Though the way I wrote my last play is not necessarily useful when I'm writing my next one. And this is the prime example of that, because it is such a personal piece. And the way I write for other voices is a way that I love to write. But if I wrote for myself the way I write for other people, it would sound so strange because it's not the way I speak. And so I need to write in a way that feels like the way I speak, but is also elevated and artistically rendered, and not just, oh, I'm just writing a thing in plain speak that I would normally say. It's like, how do I write something artistic and elevated and lifted and poetic that feels at home in my voice specifically as a performer? And that's a different thing.
It's a very different thing, and it sounds like a beautiful challenge.
It very much is. And
Yeah.
I can't wait to dive in and see where this takes me. And there'll be an excerpt of like half an hour of material I'll present at the Tarragon in January for the Greenhouse Festival. And we'll see what happens there and how it informs the full show.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to see what you do with this new play.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Stageworthy. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this episode, you can let me know in a couple of ways. If you are watching on YouTube, just go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. And you can also leave a comment on the episode page on the website at stageworthy.ca. If you've downloaded this episode to your podcast app, just go to the episode in the app and you'll see a link there. It will take you to the interview page, or just go to stageworthy.ca, search for this episode, and leave your comment. I'd love to hear from you. Speaking of wanting to hear from you, if you enjoy this podcast, please consider leaving a comment or rating. If you're listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcast, just go to the show on that app and leave a rating and a comment. Those ratings and comments help raise this podcast up in the algorithm, meaning that more people will be able to find this show. Before I get to who's on the show next week, I'm going to talk about Patreon. I can't do this show without the people who've chosen to back this show on Patreon. People like Heather, who was in from the beginning. I couldn't do this without people like Heather, who are helping me to cover the cost of producing this episode. But there's so much more. There's a lot that goes into creating a show like this. I have to pay for website hosting for the audio files and distribution to all the podcast directories. I pay for editing software. There's so many things that cost money for podcasts that I give away for free. I don't even have advertising on this podcast. So if you find value in this show, please consider supporting it on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/stageworthy. Patrons get early access to episodes, participate in conversations about the show, and are absolutely part of the team helping to make this show. Without you as a patron, I can't make this show. There are 3 levels of patronship, all of them very affordable, and all of them in Canadian dollars. Just like I said, go to patreon.com/stageworthy and check that out. I would love to have you as part of the team making this podcast. Next week, my guest is Michael Esposito II. Michael is an international actor and singer and is preparing to present a production of Daniel McIver's Monster. We have a great conversation about that coming up. Michael's production of Monster will be seen in Kelowna, British Columbia. If you're in Kelowna or nearby, that's October 31st to November 1st at the Film Factory in Kelowna. Check that out. It sounds like a fun production, and you will hear that next week on Stageworthy.